2.0 Introduction Psychology is directly related to culture, art, and architecture. The appropriate use of these various artistic components, such as color, space, and size, have the capacity to enlighten the atmosphere and influence people in a variety of ways. Humans are exposed to various architectural features in their living and work settings through spatial configuration, furniture, lighting, acoustics, and views in our homes and offices. These architectural designs can inspire humans in negative and positive ways. Even though we may pay little attention to everyday and seemingly innocuous shifts in our exposure to our surroundings, these subtle shifts can have tremendous impact on our thoughts and behavior. Architecture and design are as old as human civilization, and it is an activity which has had considerable impact on our tradition. The term design or its equivalent did not emerge in most European languages before the 16th century, but many people started designing artifacts and buildings long before the term design was institutionalized in education and professions. Architect, designers, or builder roles evolved to become two separate occupations, leading to the need for a term to describe the occupation of drawing or planning, before construction. Since then, the term architect and design has become widely used both in the design profession and in everyday life. These terms are extensively used in many different professions and describes a broad range of activity. Architects and designers play a major role in interior design, industrial design, engineering design, graphic design, urban design, information system design, and interaction design of buildings, houses, and park, etc. They have a strongly rooted connection between the meaning of plan and intention, where intention and plan both belong to the domain of design thinking. They are able to design buildings whose frameworks help to promote the creativity and reduce social and internal dissonance of people and try to increase its efficiency. Hence, the major roles of architects and designers correspond to transforming ideas and beliefs into a plan for implementation through concept, planning, and analysis, as well as execution, action, and synthesis. Architects believes that good designs are settings for human activities that help interactions among users, increase productivity, and raise their satisfaction, unlike weak design patterns which hinder users' performance, creativity, reduce satisfaction, and even undermine people's safety and security. Thus, architecture and the designing process is a challenge towards designers estimating whether a design will be good or poor before its realization. Research conducted over the past 40 years is applied to many buildings and classrooms to study its effect on creativity, efficiency, productivity, happiness, and well-being, etc. Ghaffarian Hossein et 2018. Such studies on architecture and designers comes under the branch of architectural psychology, which comprises three major domains of study, namely built environment, spatial interaction, natural environment. Over the years, the field has evolved, and a variety of investigations have emerged which has emphasized that an architectural space should be clearly perceptible, as it is human tendency to pay attention towards special environmental and graphic features such as light, color, and form. Rappaport, A. 2016. This is an important field of study as properly articulated architecture reflects the psychology of its designers, and reflect the human element. Architects and designers perceive their building designs based on the human psyche because buildings represent the physical illustration of what has been perceived by the human mind. The traditional and modern roots of architecture of any country or region can be traced back to the individual expression of a particular designer. Thus, art, artifacts, buildings and architecture offer a vehicle for conveying the deepest unconscious thoughts of human beings. The unit will introduce to the effect of architecture and design on human behavior. 9.1 First impression, history of the role of entry in architecture. The process of creating architectural space is synonymous to defining or enclosing built environment. The natural world and the human-made world, such as a building or a temple, etc., expresses the basis of human arrival and departure. The entrance is the central point which is of immediate importance and intense scrutiny. It is the noticeable and critical part of the physical space and building which has an impact on the architectural composition of which it is simultaneously a functional, emotional, and aesthetic part. Well-designed buildings with an impactful entrance can invite, orient visitors, restrict trespassers, prevent accidents, save energy, enhance positivity, represent owner's value, offer a viewpoint, and present an artistic taste. But then again, a bad entrance can destroy many other aspects of the building. For example, careless designs such as repetition of the same entrance gives an impression of ordinary appearance. So, an architect must be aware of many things while designing an entrance. Some of the perspective to keep in mind while designing the entrance are mentioned below. 1. Appearance of the entry is important as it affects the whole design of the building and physical space. When a utilitarian function is considered, an everyday or ordinary entrance is created. However, temples and corporate buildings gives importance to the entry point as it is the most attractive and major feature of the building. It is the transfer point between the inside and outside. Thus, it is important to integrate the entry to the whole because overlooking a building's structural or aesthetic integrity can create a banal or ordinary-looking entrance which impacts the human use of that physical space and building. 2. The proportion and scale dimensions entrances define people's impression and orientation towards the buildings. The entrance of the building should focus on the aesthetic, appeal, safety, cost, maintenance, and accessibility. So, the design of the entrance requires organization of the above-mentioned conflicting interest. In terms of aesthetic scale of an entry point of the building, it can be an area of possible arguments, as it should be attractive but also for human usage. For example, a person looking at the building evaluates the size, requirements of doors, safety point, and the aesthetic value. A person far away from and perhaps unfamiliar with a building should also be able to identify its entrance and find it safe and attractive. Thus, many criteria such as safety, appeal, relative scale of people, number of people using the entrance, and the scale of the building are all important considerations point of an entrance. The relationships of scale to a building can make an entrance important and visible. A badly selected scale of an entrance disturbs the quality, appeal, and value of the entire building as well as the quantity of its use. 3. Accessibility. The visibility and accessibility of an entrance impacts the user as it may distract them from the usefulness and impression of the building. The first impression and value of the building is recognized while entering the building. So, when we enter the building, many parts such as plaza, stairs, organization of sitting, bridge, or even pots/sculpture announce the accessibility of that building. For example, the waiting area or lounge area in the building within the view of the entrance function as a connecting space between the entrance and the building. The relative importance of these elements may vary with different building types. So, a separate stair for people with disability before entering the building point towards the accessibility of the building. Good design of the entry sequence is crucial to solve various needs of the people, resulting in increasing the accessibility of various people using the building. Thus, all of the above-mentioned points are considered by architects and designers who are aware of both aesthetic and functional considerations of the building. Building and its elements conveys meaning, both aesthetical and functional, so that a person can comprehend it while using the building. However, people do not realize while attributing meaning to the building elements, as that of the architect who creates misunderstanding regarding the building. Thus, it is very hard to design an entrance which satisfies, appeals and provides security as well. The important thing is how the meaning of the building itself can be expressed and easily understood by people using the physical space. 9.2 The reflection of tradition and culture through entrances. Buildings and their elements express the traditions and culture of societies all over the world. But nothing is certain as change, as traditions and cultures are changing, so is the architecture of that period. Thus, architecture becomes a gesture of a whole society. It is the duty of the designers to study the changes in the building of the past as well as the building of today to observe the changes in competence, impression, and aesthetic value. Building reflects the need, thoughts, and the ideals of people of their time. They reveal the tradition, trends, and reflect upon the characteristics of people living in that physical space. Consequently, the study of many aspects of building such as that of the entrance, which is the first impression of the building, is important as it reflects the art and culture which is intertwined in a complicated system of symbolic implication. During the third millennium in India, there was a great splendor of civilization with signs of detailed and thoroughly maintained planning. The grid planning gave indication of a division into neighborhood in accordance with the productive specialization of the inhabitants, alongside the interpretation of the distance between home and workplace. Planned functionalism and a sense of collective utility defined the concept of the city. Unlike the modern multi-story buildings in India, the houses in ancient times had only one story or two with open courtyards, windows, and doors. The entrances were placed on streets that were considered least important, which resulted in uninterested walls lined along primary roads/streets, creating privacy and hidden entrances. Meaning was derived in a different way from the sacred monuments of Indian architecture, from that of the Western world. The basic grid pattern combined with symbolic geometrical figures were the fundamental theme of Indian architecture, which had facades along the main street and the buildings and were defined by big entrances. A kudu, which is the horseshoe arch depicted in figure 9.1, served as a frame for the entrance. The doors were sometimes rectangular, but most often they were enclosed in arches, see figure 9.2. It became one of the most prevalent motifs in Indian architecture. Several famous stupas were built in the 2nd and 1st century. They were of several types with different forms and sizes, such as stambas, isolated pillars, chaitayas, sanctuaries, and viharas, monasteries. In order to protect and orient the stupa, it was surrounded by a vedeka, fence, with open toranas, gates, at the four main directions: north, south, east, and west. The stupa at Sanchi, figure 9.3, was originally surrounded by a railing with four gateways built of wood, but the railing was later replaced by a similar structure in stone. This was done to provide a suitable ground for religious ceremony, where each gate consisted of two square vertical posts with built-in horizontal bars. The gates of stupas were carved in the form of female figures or animals, usually lions and elephants, which usually led to a focus on imagistic overexpressive function and a more static and pure forms of earlier carvings. India. The Muslim conquerors occupied northern India, and Islamic architecture developed in that part during the 11th century. They built several mosques on Islamic tradition, with tombs constructed in cubic and octagonal shapes, and palaces decorated with ceramic tiles inspired by Persian architecture. Taj Mahal is an example of such a beautiful architecture, where doorways developed from the original horseshoe arch frame to a pointed arch. The largest archway is in the center and performed the important function of the building's main entrance. 9.3 The study of meaning in architecture. Representational and responsive meaning. The architect tries to instill meaning not only through the building but also through different elements of the building and architectural symbols. The architect or designers try to serve two meaning through building that are representational meaning and responsive meaning. The representational meaning is anything that is represented in human organism as a concept or an idea. For example, a rectangular object is usually recognized as a door. The responsive meaning refers to the internal responses to the already internal representations, which can be affective, evaluative, or perspective in nature. They are basically thoughts of contempt, disgust, or love regarding the value of represented environment or ideas concerning what should be done about the environment. The responsive and representational meanings are related, and usually the responsive meaning depends on the representational meaning. They both are useful in predicting human behavior, and the architectural form usually is helpful, as it suggests how people will react to their designs. The architectural forms present themselves to viewers without acting as signs or an izzard of symbols, which might suggest a meaning. But usually people predict or recognize these forms on their past experiences and background, which will differ from that of the designer or architects. Thus, the architects and designers are careful as they create an impact through their design. While the architect may intend to evoke people's emotion or reaction through a big and attractive entrance building, but some people might attend to other elements or features such as an outstanding shape and form or the color and texture of the building instead. People can judge the characteristics of the building as well as reveal the architect's psychological makeup, or personality, through the various elements in the building. In addition, the elements and features of the building reflect the attitude towards the societies as well. But the relationship works both ways, as since society also reacts and shape the attitude of the architect and/or designer. When representation is formed, it could excite, please, or disgust the views. The responsive meaning is usually formed after viewing a form which produces an internal response concerning our representation. A colorful building has the ability to attract viewers and excite them, so that they enter the building, walk closer to the building, or walk through the building. The responsive meaning is the immediate reaction or emotions that humans have towards the architectural form. When people first encounter an architectural form such as a water park, amusement park, or eating joints with attractive symbols, they might be excited, happy and thrilled. After these emotions, then they bring values, criteria, or attitudes to bear on the representation. The reflections or perspective while they observe a building determine their own mind regarding if it is exciting, boring, pleasant, disgusting, ordinary or interesting. Lastly, after the representation has been perceived and evaluated, the next behavioral response is to decide what action to take. This behavioral response is most significant to architects as they foresee that their buildings will be used for the purpose they intended. Architects are also concerned with the expressive qualities that an architectural form reflect. Expressive quality denotes a property of shape evoking human response. The human response towards an architectural form is usually to a totality, an experiencio of the whole. It is the direct experiences without being critical, judgmental, and recording the visual shapes and visual organizations of architectural forms, without any biases. Gestalt psychologists have mentioned that expressive qualities relate to configurations in our experience. Architects and designers have the ability to change the expressive quality without changing the structure. For example, if two buildings of the same size, shape, material, and structure is presented in front of viewers but one is black, and the other is white, then in that case, the whole property of the object is affected by the color change. Thus, the human response is altered by architects without changing the main structure. The different colors evoke different visual experiences, as they have very different expressive qualities. Unfortunately, nowadays the modern or multi-story, corporate building, parks, hospital, shelters, rehabilitation centers/building etc. has little or no meaning for people. Some building do not represent the activities and has no relation to outer form, making it difficult to anticipate or even decipher the form's intent. This leads to isolation, powerlessness, and a sense of helplessness. Thus, a feeling of being connected can be employed by depicting forms and meaning through structure. Modern architecture such as the high-rise buildings and multi-story buildings have consequences, as they have a negative psychological impact on humans. They cause dissatisfaction, stress, behavior problems, poor social relations, reduce helplessness, and hinder child development. Gupta, 2019, mentions some of the fears and anxiety-provoking thoughts of residents living in high-rise buildings. 1. The tragedy of people falling and jumping from the building, which causes fear and nightmares. 2. The fear of being trapped inside the building during a dire such as an earthquake or a fire. 3. The fear of the building falling during an earthquake. 4. The fear of the building being attacked. 5. The feeling of having no privacy because of the sheer number of people living in the building, which means living amongst strangers, which increases the fear of crime, less social support, and the absence of community in the midst of many. 6. The sheer number of people living in the building also increases the chances of becoming ill from a communicable disease generated by others. Air and touch-borne flu, pandemic like COVID-19, chickenpox, etc. spread more easily when people share the same hallway, lift, stairs, door handles and elevator buttons. Gupta, 2009, posits that even though some of the fear and anxiety-provoking thoughts can be realistic because so many people live together in the building, but high-rise buildings have positive outcomes too. Tall building has smaller footprints than low-rising buildings and they occupy less land area, so residents have more space for parking, green space etc. Their usual central location is an advantage for those who desire it, and these buildings offer a great view to residents and relative urban privacy. Residents living in the upper reaches have less noise pollution from outside and breathe clearer air. The high population density may promote better social interaction and the residents/neighbors offers greater choice of friends and acquaintances for social support. The outcome of living in such a building also depends on various reasons, such as location, neighborhood population density and surrounding area, and non-building factors, including characteristics, features, qualities of the residents themselves, and the surrounding physical context, services and transportation facilities, etc. These factors moderate the relation between living in high-rise and outcomes of living in low-rise or a bungalow. For example, controlled and guarded entrance reduces crime and the fear of crime in the building as compared to the single-family resident. Thus, the high-rise/multi-story buildings have both negative and positive effects, and this has been explained in Box 9.1. Box 9.1 Factors in high-rise buildings that affect human behavior. The consequences of living in high-rise buildings are many, which are caused both by the architectural design and moderated by non-architectural factors. High-rise buildings influence residents' moods, thoughts, thinking, and imagination, spatial cognition and perceptions other than the apparent size of their unit and their visual complexity. Very few studies have understood the experience of living in high-rise dwelling, so some questions remain unanswered. The visual complexity and the view were the strongest predictor of our pleasure and arousal. But some questions remain unanswered, such as do the residents fear fires, earthquake, or falling? Do people on floor experience the many floors above them as a sort of psychological crushing burden? A lot of studies also suggest that many senior citizens and young singles prefer high-rise buildings. A lot of joint families and family with children also prefer high-rise building, but it depends upon the location, residents' lifestyle, the yard and gardens surrounds the buildings. However, the ecological constraints of crowding, the high-rise building, and unsafe streets, scarce open space all seem to conspire against the urban child's natural tendency to play with cheerful spontaneity. So, the children's playtime is severely affected as parents in high-rise buildings prefer keeping their children indoor due to the stranger living in the building, so it leads to a lot of fundamental and behavioral issues among children. Close protection inside their house or sending them floors away without supervision is a choice that the parents might have to make. This leads to either restricted play, being alone, or being under supervision outside their house. Thus, children in high-rise building have lower levels of motor ability than children reared in single-family dwellings. Children who resided in high-rise versus non-high-rise buildings were reported to demonstrate twice as many psychological, emotional, and behavioral issues such as anxiety, fear, bedwetting and temper tantrums. Similarly, studies mention that Gifford, R. 2007, Segert, S. 1979, children who lived in higher story versus lower story buildings were having more behavior and psychological issues such as hyperactivity and hostility. However, if the children have access to open spaces such as park, garden, play area, then these problems may be improved. Furthermore, high-rise buildings have poor social relations with other people in the building and relationship with neighbors in the buildings. They have more acquaintances but very few friends, so they meet a lot of people because of higher density, but the friendship is more superficial. Additionally, a very interesting finding from Gupta, 2109, mentioned that people living in lower floors have good friendship and relationship due to easier access to garden. They reported having 3 times as many friends in the building as did high-rise residents. So, people who lived in higher floors knew more of their neighbors, but women who lived in lower floors had closer relations with their neighbors. Also, high-rise residents experienced more freedom, privacy, independence, less social interaction and involvement than residents living on lower floors. Another issue is the increased anonymity which accompanies the larger number of people in high-rise buildings. The existence of shared public spaces in the building might hide criminal activities from the surveillance of most potential observers. 2 potential moderators that lower the fear of crime rate in high-rise buildings are when 1. Residents assessed the local crime problems as more seriously, and 2. When it was unrelated to their own history of being crime victims. Lastly, the topic of suicide among high-rise buildings leads to a lot of debates. The substitution hypothesis holds that individuals who decide that they do not want to live find a way, regardless of the possible means. The substitution hypothesis emphasizes that if one means of suicide is removed or absent, then people will look for or will use another means to their end lives. The substitution hypothesis has been most frequently debated in the context of gun control issue, but can also be applied to high-rise buildings, as media has reported suicide cases by jumping from tall buildings. A very controversial view also suggests that tall buildings do encourage or facilitate suicide among people due to the availability that would not have otherwise occurred. 9.4 The effect of architecture and design on patients of mental health. The external environment plays a crucial role for human growth and development, as it determines the way people begin to understand and interact with the external world. Studies have mentioned that the physical environment has a direct effect on individuals' psychological and physiological health. Thus, understanding the aspects of design and architecture are beneficial and detrimental to humans, as it is crucial for mental well-being and physical health. These designs are important as it improves in reducing patients' levels of stress and enhancing their recovery. Historically, in the 19th century in the United States, design and architecture once was thoughtfully considered as a means of promoting mental wellness and psychological well-being for people who were dealing with mental health issues. This idea was born out of the philosophy that changing the patient's external environment leads to better health and outcomes. Stressful environments such as places with loud noises, lack of privacy, lack of social support, confusing layout, and lack of daylight and no access to nature can have detrimental health outcomes. Whereas implementing designing the physical space with sunlight, lesser noise, security, communal spaces, art spaces all have a positive impact on mental health. Moreover, the design and architecture of the physical space goes beyond the physical architecture and into the space which brings calmness and meets the needs of the people. The physical space and environment should bring into the equation the human interaction, so that it meets the human need of interpersonal interaction. Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride, American psychiatrist, was one of the first who was known for his influential idea that design and architecture can create a calm, stress-relieving, and healing environment for those suffering from mental illnesses. The external environment such as proper light, nature, and purposeful work and social atmosphere instills hope of getting better and cured from the psychological disorder, which eventually leads to mental well-being. Dr. Kirkbride created a model where he envisioned a therapeutic environment with garden, proper sunlight, grandiose architecture, fountains, and lush landscaping. The hospital was set on a large land on the outskirts of the city with land for farming with gardens with proper security. The symmetrical wings from the administrative building allows for an abundance of light from the large windows and proper air ventilation. The model achieved great success with a recovery rate of 7,075%, but the Kirkbride plan failed due to overcrowding and financial problems. The Kirkbride Institution eventually held triple the number of patients than it was originally designed for, which led to decrease of adequate care, lack of privacy and overcrowding. Even though the Kirkbride model disintegrated due to financial reasons, but the optimistic and moral treatment with thoughtful architectural design cured a large number of patients. But in the 20th century, the shift towards the pessimistic custodial treatment model dismissed the idea that insanity can be treated. Patients were held indefinitely in institutions, which led to isolation, punishments, and often abandoned and neglected, and this resulted in a negative public perception of the asylums and mental health care in general. Thus, the transition from institutionalized care began to slowly shift towards deinstitutionalization with the development of psychiatric medicines as treatment for severe mental illnesses, which was resulting in changing public perceptions of the asylum and mental health care. This idea was challenged by the Community Mental Health Centers Act of 1963, which led to the rise of community mental health care facilities, outpatient facilities, and informal support networks, which believed that community care would be more compassionate, supportive, therapeutic, and cost-effective than hospital care. If adequate community care is provided to people, such as access to outpatient treatment, support, and access to hospital care, unnecessary incarceration and stigmatization can be avoided. Thus, lessons from the past to be avoided, so that mental health care facility designs can be built accordingly to shift towards designing better spaces as a necessary aspect for effective care. As poorly designed spaces negatively impact mental health treatment. Managing and eliminating stressors. which are linked to poor health outcomes, is the goal of supportive healthcare design. The presence of loud noises, loss of control, a lack of social support, confusing wayfinding, glaring lights, and lack of access to nature or other distractions in healthcare facilities results in stress for patients. Thus, the importance of design choices for employee is important, so that they feel comfortable and in control of work. A well-designed architectural building is beneficial to the clients they serve, as well to promote a less stressful work environment to prevent high staff turnover. Connellan et al., 2013, found common themes regarding the intersection of architecture, design, and positive mental health outcomes. 1. Safety, security, and privacy. The literature is on the importance of security and safety implemented within the design of the facility and therapeutic space. Architectural design for safety involves easily observable patient living in a non-crowded space or living areas by staff member. An increase in population density in the facility or space has the tendency to increase the stress level and negatively correlates with perceived privacy and control. The feeling of losing control over the environment and increasing stress violence are factors associated with overcrowded inpatient ward. Thus, increased feelings of privacy and control over personal space and environment can be incorporated into the design. So, architects and designers should be mindful and maintain dialogue with patients and mental health professionals to indicate the use of the intended space, make areas distinct through colors, materials, and better lighting, and lastly define a space that provides different tactile experiences and dedicated areas for social interactions. 2. Noise and environmental stressors. Noise and unwanted sound in a mental health facility, hospital, etc. can act as an environmental stressor which has the potential to cause psychological harm. The architects and designers should be mindful of creating these spaces meant for recovery, as excess of unwanted noise, both visual and auditory, adds levels of stress and impacts sleep. Moreover, the built environment plays a major role as it becomes more demanding and plays a role in mental health, especially in urban areas. The built environment in urban areas, as opposed to rural areas, is designed to elicit responses, and alter behavior, such as that of billboards and flashing lights for example, and that can create a feeling that one's actions are not determined by their own. Studies have argued that there is a strong relationship between the environment and the brain, where the actions and thoughts of individuals are not the result of cognitive planning, but rather automatic responses that are mainly triggered by the environment. Thus, this creates an onslaught of demands from the environment, and the ability to inhibit those demands decreases, and people are less likely to be able to cope. Golombiewski, 2010, also forwarded the significance of architectural design in psychiatric care facilities and suggested that minor design choices can have a great consequence and lead to better health outcomes. Golombiewski, 2010, suggested understanding the environment from a salutogenic perspective, that is, when the internal and external environment remain predictable, comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful. Thus, using Antonovsky's salutogenic theory as a tool for the design choices of mental health care facilities can create a more calming, stress-relieving, and healing environment for patients. So, a sense of coherence can be used to alleviate mental health symptoms so that people feel in control of their environment and have the opportunity to grow and develop in that setting. Thus, in order to create a sense of coherence and be mindful of patients' needs, the architect or designers should consider the environment's aesthetics, order, safety needs, and spaces for visitors, and the opportunity for patients to have their personal belongings. This model helps to understand the relationship between the built environment and the patient's need, and it is transactional and not fixed. 3. Space and layout. Just like finding one's way in life or direction, finding one's way through the physical environment or space is important for autonomy and the feeling of being self-reliant. Studies have argued that space differentiated by color and light are easily navigated with prominent landmarks, which leads to an improvement of the experience of healthcare environments. Color helps in navigation as it makes the space more friendly, calming, and welcoming. So, color design can be implanted as a means of promoting better wayfinding. However, Understanding what sort of space design and layout that works for each population is important for maintaining a sense of autonomy, efficiency, and supportive healthcare facilities. For nature, providing access to nature, garden, plants, flowers, etc., positively affects the mental and physical health of the client. There is a psychological and physiological need for nature, which results in lower levels of anxiety, blood pressure, and heart rate in the people. Knutsford et al., 2013, conducted a study which measured the proximity to urban green spaces and its effect on mental health, and concluded that there is a decrease in anxiety, panic, and mood disorders with a decreased distance of usable green space. 5. Light and atmosphere. The impact of natural light and atmosphere has been studied in clinical studies and studies conducted on cancer patients. The study observed the impact on multisensory environment and patients' level of anxiety and stated that the room with natural lights, music, aromas, taste, and tactile sensations is thought to evoke a sense of rest and recuperation. There is still scope and needs for more research on this area and how effective this type of environment would be for different populations, including those with dementia or individuals on the autism spectrum. To understand the affect of atmosphere, Radley and Taylor, 2003, studied the effects of the physical setting, that is the hospital warden patient's recovery through the medium of photography. They concluded that most of the patients captured their bed, indicating it as a place of comfort and discomfort. The photography technique helped in visual communication for experiences that is challenging to verbalize. The technique was helpful for the patients, as the photographs with their visual commentary together became extremely significant. They not only described the object or spaces but their positive and negative associations in the hospital to explain their lived experiences of pain, discomfort, happiness, and sad moments. Lastly, Connellan et al., 2013, mentioned that with architecture and design, the human need for interactions and community is significant for therapeutic process. Architecture on its own does not support or generate positive mental health outcomes, but it is often in combination with a supportive social environment as well. Thus, people in the environment are just as important as the physical structures. Interestingly, recent research point towards the role of art therapy in open art studios, with studio space, setting and characteristics, as it helps in releasing stress and calming the patients. It provides energy from the people working in that space. More information on this is elaborated in Box 9.2. Box 9.2 Open Art Studios and Impact on Mental Health. Several studies on art projects in hospital environments have mentioned the positive impact on patients as it reduces stress levels, improves mood, accelerates recovery speeds, reduces need for medication, and improves communication. Starikoff, 2006. The positive impact of art on mental health patients led to the origin of Open Art Studio approach. The act of making art together break down the inhibitions and barriers among people, allowing them to connect to each other on an empathetic basis. This physical space for an interpretive process enacts an art as therapy approach, where the process of drawing and flexible community-driven atmosphere is paramount to the therapeutic work. Moon, 2016. Stated that the core of the open studio belief is the concept of relational aesthetics and developing interpersonal connections with people. This space is facilitated by an art therapist who is encouraging and helps in improving self-efficiency. The role of the therapist is to offer a chance so that the client feels understood through their artwork, and for the art therapist to be creator and collaborator, so that the clients can engage with the materials and processes within the studio. The studio centers around the idea of space and how the clients and art therapist come together to engage in that physical environment. The open studio approach provides the space and conditions available for the art-making process, so the ambience and functionality of the studio space is very important. The studio should reflect creativity, flexibility, a non-judgment and autonomous environment and inspiration. Open art studios are usually placed in community-based settings such as rehabilitation centers, galleries, hospital, academic settings, and educational settings. An ideal studio space provides a sense of flexibility where people can come anytime and share the space, so there is no sense of privacy. These studios have grand spaces with ample lighting, storage, and vast number of materials. But studios within a budget might have smaller spaces, but these spaces reflect creativity and people make use of an unideal environment. Architects and designers use their artistic sensibilities to reimagine and reconceptualize workspaces to intentionally cultivate a therapeutic space. The architects and designers have the potential in converting a seemingly uncontrollable environment. By installing art in the room so that it forms a connection for the people using that space and those who visit it. Architects and designers have emphasized that even the creative presence matters more than the physical features, with imperfect environments maintaining the creative energy of the space. The type of spirit and energy in the space is more important as it impacts people in different ways. Architect and designer should be mindful of the type of clients and neighbors using that space so that they feel connected to that space because they are the creators of that space. 9.5 Architectural design process based on human behavior. As we have already discussed that humans spend large part of their lives at designed spaces, whether for work, residential settings, commercial settings than natural settings, which has an impact on their behavior. The buildings regulate the course of our lives, such as a comfortable space satisfies one's physical need and improves our mood. Thus, the structure of the building and its feature impact human mind. So, an architect uses this strategy to look whether the paths are already being formed by behavior, and then enact them, rather than creating idealized path structure that ignores history, culture, tradition, and human nature. This is called pave the cow path, that is identifying the desired lines and then making paths and lastly formalizing it so that it is easier for people to use it and follow it. Architectural spaces, shapes and qualities inspire human experience and behavior as they have the power to control the spaces of the built environment. Studies have mentioned that mostly people preferred positive spaces because it led to high level of social interaction than spaces that encourage movement rather than dwelling in it. Positive architectural space is designed to help and encourage a specific goal, experience, and purpose. The space should be suitable for the people using it and should matches the requirement of the user for the activity that they are using the physical space for. The architect should know the purpose, specifics, goal, and the activities that might take place in that setting so that they can enhance it accordingly. For instance, the below figures, 9.4 and 9.5, are examples of positive and negative architectural spaces. Designers and architects create more than a building as they promise to make the building attractive and functional so that they can change behavior and attitude of people. Their behavior and techniques of design range from high-level aspirational strategies to specific tactics. They want to create a space which has the potential of involvement, interaction, and knowledge sharing, basically which fulfills the basic human need. The sociological needs, psychological state, and physiological determinants are three important criteria which affects one's attitude towards the surrounding environment and determine the human behavior. So, sociological human need, that is the social interaction that can be improved among the users through designers' perception to the interior spaces they exist in. First, maintaining privacy by protecting the individual's physical, visual, and sound transmission. So, for example, in offices spaces using partitions, providing private spaces to people and planning according to space functions and human needs. Second, interaction levels affect privacy as people cross boundaries with others by coming in contact within their intimate and personal space. Thus, interpersonal cooperation is important, which can be achieved by providing a space for interaction and achieving group task. This particular space can expand and provide various other purposes, such as a social space for different social activities. Third, territoriality is the control over space by an individual or a group. If privacy is achieved, then territoriality takes place. Lastly, crowding happens due to ineffective use of personal, social and territoriality, which reflects poor external social contact. People respond differently to crowding. So, if the activity is fun such as a concert, then crowding is considered attractive, but crowding can be irritating and frustrating if it appears in a confining way. The architect also tries to understand the psychological human response to the environment, which are complicated. It is divided into three psychological states that are perception, cognition, and spatial behavior. The perception is observers' process towards their environment through different senses of vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, so that the observer can gain information about the place. Secondly, the cognition takes place after gaining this sensory information and then mentally processes the information, which includes processes such as thinking activities, memorizing or analyzing the information. Lastly, the spatial behavior means reaction and responses to the environment information depending on the perception and cognition. By using the secondary processes that involve motivation, effect, and development and the psychological stages, the architect and designers create environmental stimulation. The environmental expectation with the gained experience and interaction with the environment are considered by the interior designers to create physical space. Sensation act as an integration point between the environment expectation and human perception of space. Lastly, the physical needs of humans while planning the physical space are extremely important, such as functionality, ergonomics, life safety, and health concerns. The designer must create his vision for the project while keeping in mind the activity taking place in the space and the reaction of the user, as space is linked with behavior patterns of the people. The functional efficiency occurs when interior's environment responds to the basic human functional needs such as vision, hearing, stability, and mobility. These needs relate to the human body requirements while supporting the psychological needs in the interior space are planning, well-being, and productivity. Various studies mention that productivity increases with environment improvement while following some specific environmental conditions that help in raising users' competence related to his/her needs. 1. Suitable lightings for the task being performed. 2. Facilities matching the need of the user's expectation and comprehension such as desk, table, lights, charging points, windows, etc. 3. Proper human mobility and attention to the handicapped/disabled users, which removes accessibility barriers. 4. Productivity range of motion that allow users to feel at ease and comfortable while using the physical space. 5. A suitable auditory environment that allows ease of communication, with limited noise annoyance and avoids distraction. The ergonomic design helps the user in achieving his needs in the environment. Ergonomics strongly recognizes that the environment does influences and impacts human behavior, so they use this combination of data to create designs which are both humanistic and functional. This includes design aspects like space, furnishings, and environmental variables such as temperature, sound, humidity, and ventilation requirements to be sensibly endorsed to fulfill the purpose of the human body. The goal is to plan for the intended activities, furnishings, and finishes that are convenient to user expectations. Lastly, the life safety and health are another aspect is the priority of the architect and designers. They provide individual with an appropriate facility with an assurance of acceptable travel path to the user of that space and a clear indication of a safe exit, meaning it is important to design the guiding mechanisms that are visible and clearly stated, as people do not have the opportunity to decipher codes which may show safe passage at panic or emergency. It is necessary to control the visual environment, as humans have a natural response towards danger sensing which transforms to fighting or escaping. So, the application of the design concept and the overall planning along with the user is important. Safety and health aspects are more effective in a space where the needs meet the desired activities and task, resulting in reducing the physical harm. Health aspects means to be aware of selection materials like paints, adhesives, smokes, alarms that may cause headache. Some of the architects and designers cannot control these aspects because health and safety aspects are less noticeable to people than life safety. However, designers must be conscious of material selections as it impacts on occupants' health.